There was more shochu produced in Japan than tequila in Mexico.
So it's still a pretty big domestic consumption then.
More than sake. Japanese shochu, shochu, is not the same as Korean soju. There's no easier way to insult two cultures at one time than to conflate soju and shochu. My overriding goal is to be able to order shochu in any bar I walk into anywhere in the world.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today in the studio we're sitting with Christopher. Thank you so much for coming all the way to Osaka to make some time on your busy schedule to meet us. You're a shochu expert, you're the founder of Honkaku Spirits, and you're also an official ambassador for Japan's indigenous or native spirits. So we're going to talk about all of these. I'm super curious because I don't know too much about shochu myself and probably have a lot of misconceptions.
Well, thank you first and foremost for welcoming me and being patient with me, because I know we've been trying to get this meeting together for months. And to answer the question of how I got here, it's very, very simple. I followed a girl. Tale as old as time. And I was living in Korea. This is back in the early aughts, 2000 to 2002. And she wanted to live in Japan. She was a huge Japanophile. And she taught herself Japanese. She ended up majoring in Japanese in university. She got a job at the Japanese consulate in Busan. So she was very gung-ho on the Japan experiment. And I said, hey, I would love to see how you operate outside of your comfort zone. So to see if our relationship could go the distance. And here we are. 23 years later, we're married and have a mortgage and no kids, but decent jobs, good community, and a pretty happy existence.
Was Japan something that was ever on your radar? I mean, you were in Korea already, so that was relatively close. So something must have brought you there.
Yeah. I mean, I graduated from undergrad and didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life. I wasn't like my sophomore year roommate who had basically accounting firms just leaving message after message, and they were just bidding for his services after he graduated from university. And he's still at a major accounting firm in the States. And the numbers just kept going up. The salary package just kept getting better and better. I'm like, are you going to answer any of those? He's like, no, I'm just going to let him fight it out. And that was the first couple of months of our last year of university. I was like, damn. And I didn't have a clue what I was going to do.
And you were thinking, maybe I should have studied accounting.
Maybe I should, maybe I should have done internships every summer like he did. Instead, I was brewing beer.
Also, you were brewing beer in university already.
I started brewing beer when I was in high school. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. But I basically, after I graduated from undergrad, I went back home for a while and I became a public school teacher. And I hated it because the kids are monsters. And it's just hate crimes all over the place. The things they do to each other inside the walls of a school, outside in the real world, that's a damn hate crime. And just corralling all of this, it was 50% of my day was on discipline. That's what I was spending my energy on. Hated it, got the hell out of there. Ended up getting a decent gig in South Korea in a little city called Masan, west of Busan. Moved in right down the street from my future wife, and the rest is history.
That was a teaching gig as well?
That was, yes. I was in education for a very, very, very long time. And I still consider myself to be an educator.
How did you get into brewing beer in high school?
So, what grade was it? It would have been 10th grade, I think. And for some reason, the teachers put me in a project group with one of my best friends, which was stupid. And we were supposed to recreate a newspaper from the 19-teens, basically the era of prohibition in the United States when alcohol was illegal, full stop. And so we went to Middlebury College, which had a very good microfiche archive. I wonder if a lot of people listening don't even know what microfiche is probably, but it's when you take old documents and you put them on what is essentially film, and then you look at you feed this film through. It's basically a lo-fi microscope, and so that you can see these replicas or these images of these old newspapers, magazines, what have you, just to preserve them. And so that's how we did our research. And it turned out there were lots of news stories about rum running, bathtub gin, speakeasies, all this whole culture that developed in order to satiate the need for alcohol, because that's a business that's not ever going to go out of business, you know. And we were like, well, that's really interesting. And we were going to have to write our own articles, advertisements, all these things to make it very period appropriate. And at one point, Jesse and I, my good friend, like, all these people are making hooch at home. How do you do that? So we started researching something else. And there was plenty of information about that. And we researched how to make wine and then how to make beer. And he and I both were already pretty big fans of beer at that point. I think we were like 14, 15 or something like that. And so we've discovered, oh, it's not that hard. You just need buckets and you need cleanliness. And that's about it. You just got to keep things super clean. And Jesse and I thought, we can do that. And fortunately, my mother, to this day, is a deacon in the Episcopal Church. And my father used to follow her to church every Sunday. So I would have the kitchen for a whole 6 hours. And we would brew a batch most weekends.
That's enough? 6 hours?
6 hours is enough to basically start the boil, fill the tub with ice so that you can cool it down really quickly, get the hops in there. Get it into a fermenter, clean everything up, get the wort smell out of the kitchen. And that went on for a couple of years. And then one day my dad came home early from church with a funny tummy. And he said, what is that smell? And it's like, oh, crap. We're making beer. And his first reaction was gorgeous. He was like, you can do that? And we were like, yeah, and it's kind of good. He's like, can I have some? Like, sure. And they wandered off, but I was like, there's no way that's the end of it. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, he'd had a think and he was like, no, this ends now. This can't be okay. And so that was the end of our little secret business, but I turned that experience into something that started me on the path of where I am right now. I went to the local craft brewery and I said, I really want to learn how to make beer professionally. I already know how to make it. I just want to learn how to do it at a larger scale. And they allowed me in as an apprentice.
Cool.
And that was when I was still in high school. And then one fateful week, probably the most important week of my life, honestly, in terms of my career path. Our first brewer wrecked his back, couldn't lift bags of grain. And our second brewer, I'm not kidding, left Vermont to join the circus. So we didn't have anybody who could make beer. And Lawrence Miller, the president, CEO of Otter Creek Brewing in Middlebury, Vermont, came in and said, does anybody know how to make beer? And 17-year-old me was like, I do. And he's like, oh, damn it, the kid? And our cellar master, Tom, said, well, as long as he doesn't drink it, it's legal for him to make it. And that's how I became the youngest commercial brewer in the US. I was too young to legally drink what I was making. And I was making good stuff. And I was immensely proud of what we were doing. You couldn't talk to 17-year-old me about beer. I was the most annoying underage beer snob you've ever met in your life, because people were lining up to fill their bottles with stuff that I had made. And that I was very proud of that job.
You still went into education then, instead of kind of continuing into becoming a master brewer. And
yeah, that's true. I knew that I loved education. I one of the things I did to make money on the side, and this is after my father warned me not to go into education. Both my parents were educators. Everybody in my family was a teacher on both sides. And he said, don't do it. There's no money in it, no respect. Kids are going to attack you. He had just come home. He was a little traumatized. He had come home from a weekend workshop on learning how to protect yourself from kids who are trying to hurt you. And he was like, this is no good anymore.
Don't do it, Chris.
Yeah, he's like, don't, just avoid it. But I had already, at that point, later on, and I was like, cool, Dad, thank you for the advice. I really appreciate that. He's not like trying to push me to be a lawyer or a doctor. He's like, just maybe think twice about doing that. And sure enough, when I was living in Spain for a year and I had no money, one way that I made a little bit of money was to tutor Spanish students who were trying to take the Cambridge examinations for English ability certification. And it turned out, I was like, oh, I really enjoy this. I love the process. I love the challenges of it. I love seeing people's ability evolve through their own hard work and me just sort of bumping them back into play. And so I sort of got the bug when I was 20 years old living in Spain, and it stayed with me.
So teaching English to foreigners, maybe different learning categories than school kids.
Correct.
And that kind of led you to Korea, down the street of your now wife.
Yeah.
And eventually to Japan.
Right.
When did liquor come back into play? When did the interest into the itch to make some more kind of come back?
Well, when I first got to Japan, I had no idea what shochu was. I had never heard of awamori either, but I knew what sake was, or nihonshu, and I didn't actually have a very good opinion of it because this is back in the 90s when I was drinking it in college. Nobody knew how to handle it. And very often when I would go with my teammates from the track and field team, we would go have Japanese food, whatever. I had no idea, but the older guys on the team loved it and they would pay for it. So I was like, I don't care. And we always had to drink this sake stuff, which was in terrible condition. They would open a bottle when they first got it, pour it for somebody, leave it on the shelf like a spirit for months until somebody else ordered it. It's vinegar now. And they pour it for them. They heat it up to try and hide it a little bit. We called it dirty feet. It was abhorrent. So when I came to Japan, I was like, I really need to give this another shot. And very quickly, I realized I had no idea about sake from my experiences in America. And that was fun. The first couple of months, I was really sort of just learning, nosing everything, trying a little bit of everything. And then one day, it was raining and I was at one of our local spots that's mostly sake. They had some other bottles. I couldn't read any Japanese. I didn't speak any Japanese at that time. All the bottles looked the same to me. It's all sake. I didn't realize that there were a few on the back bar that were actually not sake. And one day when there were no other customers, the master just busted one of those out. Here, try that. He spoke no English. I spoke no Japanese, but we both spoke alcohol. So it worked out. And he pushed a barley shochu in front of me. I was like, that's not sake. He's like, just try it.
Just drink it.
And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And he proceeded to kind of taste me through 5 different types of shochu. I had a barley first, and then I remember the second one was definitely sweet potato because he said it's also shochu. It was also clear as water. I smelled it. I was like, whoa, that is not the same thing. That's not shochu. You made a mistake. These can't both be shochu. He's like, they both are. Then I had a kokuto, a rice, and I think a buckwheat or a soba shochu, all side by side. All look like water. All smell exactly like what they were made from. It was fascinating to me. The fact that you could have all these different things called the same drink reminded me very quickly, this is like craft beer. There's all these different styles here in this spirit. I've never heard of this before. Where do they make this stuff? And he's like, down south in Kyushu. I had no idea where that was. Can I take a train? He's like, no, you probably want to fly. And within probably a month or so, I took a long weekend, just went straight down there. And that was the beginning of a crazy rabbit hole that I'm still tumbling down. And it's been wild.
So let's start at the beginning of this rabbit hole, shochu. Just like you, maybe people that are living outside of Japan just think of sake as like what we call nihonshu. And they don't necessarily know too much about all the many other liquors that are in Japan. And some that know of shochu maybe don't really know exactly what it is. So how do you define the spirit?
So that's a very important question to answer right from the start. Shochu, and I'm also going to include, when I'm talking about shochu, awamori, which is technically a little older than shochu. It's made in Okinawa. They are Japan's native spirits. They're much older than whiskey. And I know Japan is much more famous for whiskey, but whiskey making in Japan is only about a century old. Shochu and awamori are 5 or 6 centuries old. And they are spirits made mostly down in the southern parts of Japan. And they are made from a variety of tubers, grains, sake leaves or kastori shochu, and kokuto sugar is also allowed. But there's 53 approved ingredients and their koji that are used to ferment, to create a moromi or a mash that can then be distilled. And that's where we can draw very clear lines between sake making, which is a lot more like beer making. There's no distillation. It's not a spirit. And the spirits world, where you're concentrating those flavors and aroma and isolating the ethanol so that you get a more powerful and more concentrated drink. You could say a more pure version of the fermentation. And so the cool thing about shochu is that it is a spirit. It tends to be 25 to 30% ABV, so a little bit mid-weight, and it tastes like what it's made from. And no additives are ever allowed, which I'm very proud of, because that's not very common in the world of spirits. Usually there's unlabeled additives in lots of things.
So sake nihonshu is a fermented beverage, and shochu is distilled.
Fermented and then distilled. So there's an additional step.
How is it possible that one beverage is made from so many different ingredients? So if I think of wine, I think of grapes. If I think of nihonshu, I think of rice. And usually each drink will have its own kind of core ingredient, but shochu has so many.
Back in the day, we're talking a couple hundred years ago, farmers all across southern Japan were making distilled beverages from whatever the local agricultural products were. So in northern Kyushu, it was grains, it was rice and barley mostly. In southern Kyushu, in southern Miyazaki, in Kagoshima today, it's sweet potatoes because they grow like weeds there. Mm-hmm. And, you can find places where they specialize in water chestnuts. So, they were distilling fermentation from that. And what eventually happened was that in the 1800s, the Japanese government wanted to collect taxes, and they wanted to modernize this. Basically, it was moonshine, essentially, that these farmers were making. They were just selling it or trading it locally. And there were all these different regional styles, really. And what ended up happening was that was all codified into the national tax program. And shochu developed some boundaries. And basically, those boundaries were, they've eventually evolved to be approved ingredients. And those original agricultural products from many, many years ago are a big part of that. Koji must be used. And I don't know when the no additives things came about, but it's indelible in the style now. And single pot distillation is another big thing. That's really unique to the world of shochu and awamori. Although I have to say pisco is also another single distilled spirit, which is very rare in the world of spirits. But pisco is only made from grapes, right? So hopefully somebody out there who's listening to this is interested in a little bit more of a technical discussion of distillation. But when you distill something, you're essentially turning two knobs. You're turning the knob that controls the amount of alcohol up, and you are bringing down whatever the flavors, aromas, esters are. So if you distill twice, you go stronger on this side, more ethanol, and you go weaker on this side. So it says you can't have both. You can't maximize both. You can have one or the other. You can have lower alcohol, higher ester, or high alcohol, lower ester. And that's how it is now. By Japanese tax law, shochu and awamori makers are forced to trade down on alcohol and preserve many of the aromas and flavors from the fermentation. That's really cool, I think, because it's hard to do well.
It's interesting that it seems like the Japanese tax law is the one that kind of gave a framework for shochu.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at the beverage purely from the point of view of, let's say, a mixologist, a bartender that is using it, would you say that they are somewhat like even different beverages? If you have one that is made of sweet potato, one that is made of buckwheat, and that they cannot be used in the same way?
Shochu is the most diverse spirit on the planet, period. So to say that sweet potato shochu compared to rice shochu are two distinct things, that is entirely accurate. They're made kind of in the same manner. The step by step is similar, but the end result is night and day different.
So back then, you hop on a plane, you fly to Kyushu, you go for your long weekend, and you hop down the rabbit hole. Where do you go? Did you go to a distillery straight away to kind of figure out what's going on here?
So this is back in 2003. There was no Wikipedia page for shochu in English or in Japanese. I basically wrote down some addresses that I had found on the internet, and I walked over to a couple of distilleries that are in downtown Kagoshima City. There's one fewer than there used to be, maybe two fewer now, but I just went up and knocked on the door and said, "Can I see?" And they were like, "No, get out of here." So I failed spectacularly on the first go, but I was there for a weekend and I found some great little izakaya and bars. Still spoke almost no Japanese at that point, but you know, alcohol is the international language of friendship. So I made fast friends and was determined not to lose so quickly. So about a month and a half later, maybe it was 2 months later, I did it again, went back down. And at that point, a couple of people, the regulars at these izakayas, were like, "Oh, you're back. You can't, more punishment, huh?" And I was like, "Well, I got to figure out how this works." And word got around. Tenmonkan in Kagoshima City is a phenomenal place to hang out. And anybody who's listening who hasn't been should absolutely go. It's the last stop on the Shinkansen, at least the southern stop. And word got around, and eventually somebody heard, "Okay, there's this American kid. He's harmless, but he just wants to see how shochu is made. So somebody please give him a break." And eventually somebody let me in, and I was blown away. I was like, "Wow, this is nothing like beer making." I was shocked at how they were conducting their fermentations, how are you getting from starch to sugar? There's no malt involved, and there's no kettle, and there's no hot side to this process. What is going on here? This is voodoo. So it was really interesting for me. And then because I still didn't get it, I had to go again. So I made a kind of regular routine. And at that point I was teaching writing at a university in downtown Tokyo. So I was pretty time rich. I had massive breaks. There were it's funny here. The university system, they give you a lot of time off. You know, you're not in class too much. It's pretty impressive. So if the students are there, I didn't have to be there either. So I was in Kyushu quite a lot.
One of the things that you said really shocked you was when you stepped into the distillery and nothing was as you expected it. If I think of sake or Nihonshu breweries, I imagine these large tanks where they have the koji, and then they filter through this and they kind of check the quality of the water as well.
Yeah.
What did you see when you stepped into that distillery?
I saw pots in the floor, and those were the
just like the buckets in your kitchen.
Yeah, basically. But you know, these big amphora, these big clay pots that were sunk up to their shoulders in the distillery floor. I'm like, what? That's a hazard. Somebody's gonna fall in that thing. And then I didn't see a kettle anywhere. There was nowhere to boil the wort. I didn't see anything that I would recognize as part of the brewing process. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what koji was yet. I don't think I had ever heard that word. Well, I probably had on my first trip down when somebody drunkenly tried to explain to me how shochu was made in, 90% Japanese and 10% English and 100% gestures. And it was, I was just looking around, I was like, I don't get this. How does this work? How are you going from starch to sugar in order to ferment? And there was a huge language barrier there. So it took a long time to get around that. And there were no books in English about this. There were no resources. So it was really just tenacity is all it came down to. I just kept going back.
So you kept going back, but you were teaching at university. Now this is your career and you're fully involved into the world of Japanese spirits.
Yeah.
When came the time for you that you were like, no, I can't just keep flying back and forth between the university job and this. I want to work in this. I want to do something with this spirit.
So it was kind of a slow, drawn out process. But after I had made a bunch of friends, it took years, but I was making friends down in Kyushu. I had lots of friends in the industry. When they would come to Tokyo, they would invite me to their events, which was really fun for me. And I got to meet all these other people. And I started to sort of fall in love with some of these families. It really small distilleries, 5th generation, 6th generation Toji. They really just made shochu forever just for their community. But just like in the sake industry and pretty much everything here, there was pressure on the industry because they needed to find new markets. People aren't drinking as much as they used to. Young people don't drink hardly at all compared to their grandparents' generation. And so I keenly felt that we needed to find a way to activate more markets and possibly international markets in order to make sure that these distilleries were handed down to the next generation, which was and still is intensely important to me. And I was at the point where I would get calls from people who were shorthanded and they would say, could you come down and help? And so I was like going down I was honored that somebody would trust me enough to help them make their shochu when they're short-staffed in like November. And then I started to think I need to get the word out. And I started to do lots of tastings and parties and shochu events and invite the distillers up and work with a chef and, do something exciting. And it was interesting because I was really trying to target the expat community and anybody else who happened to be in town in Tokyo. But 90% of the guests were Japanese because they wanted to hear about shochu from an outside perspective.
Interesting.
So I was having to do, and by this point I had learned enough Japanese through my interactions with people in Kyushu that I could use the language. I could speak and listen to it. I couldn't read or write it. And so I was doing bilingual tastings. And I was like, this is not what I want. So I started working on my book, the Shochu Handbook, which I eventually published in 2014. And that was purely out of an attempt to just reach an audience that was not in Japan. And that's what sort of really set me on the path to, it got me on the radar of the government because they're like, oh, this kid is really serious about this. And so then they started sending me around the world to brainwash as many folks as I could at different trade shows. And that's what, it's funny. People will listen very intently when you pour them a glass of booze.
I can imagine. You said that the beverage, the consumption was declining back then, and the families were struggling to kind of stay in business. What was the image of the drink? If I kind of usually, for them talk to my wife, shochu was a thing her grandfather was drinking.
Right.
Not really so much what young people drink, although it's used, I think, in chuhai and lemon sour as well nowadays, and commonly consumed under that form. Yeah,
you made a couple of good points there. But just importantly, the stuff that's used in chuhai, lemon sours, and izakaya, it's the backbone of all of those very simple cocktails, essentially. It is shochu in name only. It's essentially an industrial spirit that, for all intents and purposes, when people say that shochu is a Japanese vodka, if you're talking about that shochu, it's called korui shochu. It's a much more modern style that is much more like a vodka. I will say, yeah, that kind of is. The traditional stuff, the stuff that I'm enamored with, honkaku shochu and ryukyu awamori, that stuff can never be confused with vodka because it tastes like what it's made from. But yeah, so if it's shochu or, chuhai, that originally was a shochu highball, right? Chuhai. And so it used to always be shochu. Today they use whatever's cheapest. And oftentimes it is cheaper to just make a vodka.
Saving costs and
and so margins. A lot of the chuhais today are vodka-based RTDs rather than shochu-based RTDs.
What is RTD?
Ready to drink. So it's a mixed drink in a can, essentially. But to get to your other point about how younger people don't really drink shochu, I think when I first came to Japan in 2002, 2003, that was actually the time of what's called the third shochu boom. And it's when shochu sales domestically eclipsed sake sales.
Really?
Yeah, since 2003.
What was kind of behind that boom?
People started to figure out that, the shochu industry had its bourbon moment. Bourbon, in the 80s was grandpa's drink, in the United States. And then after a while, in the 90s, people started to figure out, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And it's all these little, farmhouse distilleries. And it had a real moment in it, which we're still riding today, although right now the market's a little bit rough. Shochu had the same thing. 2003, there were so many new shochu bars in Tokyo and in Osaka that were just popping up all over the place because people in the big cities finally figured out that this blue collar drink from the South was actually really interesting and really good. And so there was this big renaissance. And I kind of happened on the industry right as that was happening, but it wasn't necessarily the small distilleries that were really benefiting from it. They just didn't have the scale. They didn't always have the routes to market that a lot of the bigger ones did. And so, you still didn't get some of the really, really cool stuff up in Tokyo, but there was all of a sudden so much more shochu available. It was pretty surprising. And a lot of folks, your example is great. A lot of folks who grew up thinking, oh, that's grandpa's drink, kind of came back around to it and realized, oh, wait, this is actually really good. And a lot of things had changed in the interim. If you look at the genesis of shochu production from the 70s, for instance, all the way through the late 90s into the early aughts, technology got better, techniques got better, even the ingredients got better. Universities had been working on strains of sweet potatoes that are only for shochu making.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so everything kind of came together, and the industry really had a moment in the spotlight, and a lot of people weren't ready for it. And they ended up having to spend tons of money to ramp up production because they couldn't satisfy demand. And it was insane for a while.
And after such a boom, usually comes a bust.
Yeah, the Lehman shock around that time, 2011 or so. 2014 was about the peak for the shochu industry domestically. And sales have sort of been mirroring sake sales, like -1%, -2% year on year, every year since then. And I truly believe that the next frontier is outside or beyond Japan's borders. And that's what I've been working on ever since.
Why is it a spirit that is mostly done in Kyushu only? Like Nihonshu has been kind of growing and is available throughout Japan with local distilleries everywhere. Why is shochu so concentrated in that area?
Great question. Seishu Nihonshu is made with, everybody knows this, with koji, of course, all of these beautiful things from Japan are. It's made with one specific type, which we'll just directly translate from Japanese and call it yellow koji. Kikoji is very good at highlighting fruit and floral aromas from the fermentation, but it has an Achilles heel. The Achilles heel is that it doesn't produce really any acidity during fermentation. That can be really dangerous because other microorganisms in the environment notice that there's a huge pot of glucose there. It's a buffet of sugar, and they want at it. If you have an acidic environment, it's much harder for those other microbes in the environment to mess up the fermentation. Now, because yellow koji doesn't make any acidity, that's why it's, up north during the winter months when sake tends to be in full swing, right? And it's really only the big boys, the largest producers, who can really make sake year round because they have great climate control and much better facilities. Now, down south in the southern half of Kyushu and below that, it's too hot for sake making with yellow koji. You're going to get fouled batches like all the time. Now, what happened was the first spirit, Japan's original spirit, is from what is today Okinawa. And they had their own strain of koji we'll call it black koji. It's kuro koji. And that guy makes unbelievable levels of acidity during fermentation. So you can ferment in Okinawa, which is essentially it's the subtropics, essentially. It is super humid down there. You can open pot ferment there with the windows open with this black koji, and the yeast are trained to withstand that acidity and that heat, but nothing else can survive if it drops in there. It'll just sizzle. So you had this ulterior way to do it. But what also happened back in, we believe, in the 1400s was that distillation technology and know-how, I say technology, it was a pot over a fire. It found its way into the Ryukyu. You can call it the kingdom.
Yeah, back in the day, it was the Ryukyu kingdom.
Yeah, I would almost call it an empire, but it's a yeah, sure. It was a series of kings that were very loosely connected historically, not from the same family, which a lot of people don't realize. But they started to take this stuff and they realized they could make even more alcohol by distilling this rice ferment with black koji and many other things as well. And that was the starting point of distillates in Japan. Now, that know-how and those drinks followed their way up that ribbon of islands to southern, what was Satsuma, now Kagoshima. And they took the local tubers had been introduced at some point after that in the 1700s, I believe is when they first made their way up there, saving the local populations from severe famine a couple of times because the rice crops failed, but they had sweet potatoes. And so they eventually, if we bring this all together, late 1800s, early 1900s, at that point, you've got black koji being used to make the local fermentations in Kagoshima, then distill that. It's all coming together now. And now there's a third strain. It's called white koji. It's somewhere in between. It's actually a mutation from black that they found in a petri dish in a lab in the early 1900s. So about 100 years ago.
That's quite a coincidence.
Yeah. Yep. And so white koji is also, white and black are the two most common in shochu production. Black for a long time, although it was used to make all awamori, it was used in Kyushu as well, but people got sick of it because it was super gregarious. The filamentous mold, this is a mold we're talking about. Yeah. I hope people realize that. It is really ploofy. That's not a word. Ploofy. It would just fly all over the distillery, cling to the walls, get on people's clothes. You inhale it and you develop an allergy to it. So it was a little unwieldy. And white koji, this new mutation, did many of the same things, great acidity levels, but was a little bit easier to work with. So white sort of took over the shochu industry after, from the 20s on. But sorry, to get back to answering your question directly, shochu really took hold down south because part of the reason was because they couldn't really do anything with yellow koji down there. And so an entirely different alcohol culture developed that was independent of sake.
So that's an alcohol culture. When you discovered it, you started kind of bringing to Tokyo in a way. And then in the mid 2010s, so 15-ish, you started focusing on, okay, how can we bring this overseas? Because if you want to give a second life or a third or fourth, I think you said it was a third boom, so like a fourth boom to this, we need to bring it overseas. When you came to Japan in 2002, you said you had no idea what shochu was, and I think many people living overseas probably had never really heard of this unless they had a very specific interest in Japanese spirits. And even today, it's less known. Nihonshu is seeing a boom in the United States, also in Europe. How is it with shochu? How do you bring this internationally?
So this is what I'm purely focused on right now. I quit my job as a university professor in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And after having purchased a third of an export company in Fukuoka, actually, in like 2018, I think that was. In 2020, decided to get the other side of that channel and started an import company in New York. So I've got my fingers in both of those pies.
It was a perfect timing too, right?
Oh my Lord, what a time to give up your health care. It was, and I have to give my wife, the wonderful human that I met, who I moved in down the street from back in 2000, give her huge credit because she knew how passionate about this I was. And two things about me that you may have already begun to sense. Number one, if I'm really interested in something, you're not really going to be able to hold me back. And number two, I also am sort of a jump first, ask questions on the way down type of person, for better or worse. And she really was supportive right from the very beginning. She's, I had a great job at a very, very well-respected university in downtown Tokyo. She's still a professor there. And I was going to give that up to try and do something that she couldn't even understand. And I didn't even understand, quite frankly. But she was like, I'm not getting in the way of this. If you think you can do it, then go for it.
So you have the export company in Kyushu, in
Yeah.
Fukuoka, and then you set up an office and a branch in New York.
It's actually a separate company entirely, but that's Honkaku Spirits is the newer company, the younger company. The one in Fukuoka is called Wine Traders, and it's been there for a little while. I just bought part of something that already existed. But it allows me to sort of put my hand on the scale on both sides, cut some middle people out, and keep the price down for the consumer at the end. But we decided to focus on the US first just because through our experiences, it was just going to be a little bit easier to get the bartenders involved. And that's really what we had to focus on. We really had to win over the bartenders. So to answer your question more directly, yes, sake is still having a great time. It's a party overseas. And the year-on-year sales or shipments are usually double digits, except for last year. This year, I think it's going to be double digits again. It's impressive, and people are really excited about it. Shochu, though, only recently started to export in any real volume. And so the industry as a whole is probably a good 3 decades behind the progress that the sake world has built for itself.
Wow.
And during that time, they've really done a great job of educating, activating, creating people who are super passionate about it and will help carry the story to their own communities. They've done a great job. And we need to do something similar. Now, one thing that we have that the sake folks don't necessarily enjoy is a much easier play in cocktail programs. And that, even though I'm a purist, and when I drink shochu at home, you haven't asked about this, but how do you drink it? I drink it cut 50-50 with hot water, even in the summer, which is a very old school way to do it. It makes the drink a little sweeter. The bouquet is unbelievable. And I do that all year round. That's not going to work as your opening play, your gambit in the chess game of alcohol distribution internationally. When you're trying to introduce something incredibly new to people, even though it's 600, 500 years old, they need it on a silver platter. They need it contextualized in a way that makes it simultaneously really new, refreshing, really exciting, gives them a little bit of a journey to another far off place, but is delivered in a way that doesn't make them feel like it's too risky or doesn't make them feel uncomfortable. And the cocktail in American culture is absolutely where that's at. So I've been studying cocktails nonstop for 5 years now and trying to find ways to get these traditional Japanese products into that vessel. And that involves a lot of work with bartenders.
So the way into an overseas market is through bartenders who will popularize the beverage or the spirit through new cocktails that the audience will like and discover, and then maybe they'll be kind of interested down the line in kind of trying this more into different shapes and forms. So let's talk about how to best enjoy shochu. You said at home you drink it or you enjoy it the more old school way, 50-50 with hot water. But for the overseas market, the introduction is more through cocktails. So for people that have never tried it, would like to try this, where do they start and how do they get a good taste for it?
First of all, I want to stress that there is a shochu for everyone. And it's so diverse. You just got to start by thinking, okay, which flavor am I after here? And the sweet potato shochu segment on its own, there's 5 dozen varietals of sweet potato that they use to make sweet potato shochu. And they start as white as the paper in front of you. That's what I would term the old school segment, the white sweet potatoes. And now there's all these new like purple, orange, pink, red, yellow sweet potatoes that I call new school. Earthier, funkier, conifer, soil, like pepper. But on the new school side, it's fruit, flowers. It's crazy. And there's such a spectrum. So just even sweet potato, you might smell an old school one, what your grandpa used to drink, and be like, whoa, that's pretty rich. That might not be for you. That's fine. But if you try over here, I bet you can find something. I bet you can find a sweet potato shochu that presents like green apple or lychee or banana or has a real strong grape note to it. And how would you drink it? Make a highball. Try it with bubbles. It's going to brighten it up. It's going to bring the alcohol down. And it's going to be a nice, easy way to sort of step behind the curtain and see if this is going to work.
So just with like sparkling water
Yep, over ice.
over ice.
Yep. So first make a rocks preparation, tall glass, put a few ice cubes in there, fill it about a third of the way with shochu, and then twice as much to 3 times as much sparkling water or seltzer or whatever you have. You don't want to stir it because when you stir a bubbly drink, you're going to release the carbonation. It'll go flat really quickly. Maybe just stick something in there, stick a spoon in there, I like to lift the ice up just a little bit. It'll mix it just enough. And that's an easy way to do it.
So this is kind of if you want to get your first taste for shochu and you want to kind of get a taste for the shochu and not just have it too mixed with something else.
Right.
How do you even select the bottle? Because if you go to the shop or if you shop online, you will see all those bottles. Most of them, I assume, have just very beautifully written calligraphy on them and with the name of the distillery and the family, and this is 6th generation and the history behind it. But you don't necessarily understand or know or can read any of this. So you are looking at this and like, okay, do I pick this one or do I pick this one? Maybe this one has a cooler label. I'll go for this one.
That's often how the decision-making process happens, quite frankly. If you happen to be in the United States, you're going to have some help there because the US has very strict labeling laws for imported products. And my own company brings in, we probably got 20, 30 brands in the States now. And it's a company called Honkaku Spirits. Some of it you can buy straight from our website online, depending on the state that you reside in. And that'll be a lot easier because it'll have tasting notes and you can get some help there. In Japan, it can be a little trickier. You go into a supermarket, usually there's a couple of shelves of sake, and then right nearby, there's a couple of shelves of shochu. If the ABV on the product is above 20, if it's more than 20% alcohol, that's a shochu, all right? If it's under 20, very strong chance it's a sake. So the 20 is the magic line. But I guess if I was to let me give some advice here. The easiest way to start with shochu is either barley shochu, rice shochu, or probably kokuto sugar shochu. If you like rum, kokuto sugar, all right? If you like beer or whiskey, try some barley shochu, all right? If you like wine, if you like sake, rice shochu is probably a good way to start. And a lot of those drinks this is another nerd alert, but there's a new style of pot still called a vacuum still. And it allows distilleries, it's used to make perfume, quite honestly. It accents or it releases, it highlights the fruit and flower in whatever is being distilled. And so vacuum distillation has allowed the shochu industry to make much softer, more lighter interpretations of the drinks than they ever used to be able to make. And most rice shochu, probably most barley shochu today, and a very large amount of kokuto sugar shochu is made through vacuum distillation. So they're just softer drinks.
So if you like some of these other spirits, you might have an entry point into shochu. A few months back when we talked with John Gontner, with whom you've worked with as well, he said that for sake, generally, you can also kind of get an idea of the quality based on the price. It's usually relatively accurate and fair, as opposed to maybe other spirits where some beverages may be overpriced and not deliver on the quality. How is it for shochu? If you pay more for shochu, can you assume you're getting a better quality one?
Yes, I think that's pretty fair.
What will be the difference taste-wise between, let's say, 2 sweet potato shochu, but one is higher quality and one is more like an entry?
If it's a cheaper sweet potato shochu, for instance, it's just going to be easier. It's going to be lighter. It's not going to be particularly complicated or nuanced. And that might be exactly what you want. It's a good starting point. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now, I would like to stress that pretty much all shochu is underpriced, at least in Japan.
Okay.
Considering the amount of alcohol that's in it compared to sake, for instance, it's often priced very evenly with sake, which does not make a whole lot of sense. And, we won't get into the intricacies of it, but I really feel like the cheaper stuff in Japan is going to be 800, 900 yen a bottle. And it's going to be fine, right? It'll be poured over ice, drink it on the rocks, drink it in a highball. It's soft enough. You could probably just drink it, sip it neat if you're having a bad day, I guess. And then once you get up in over 1,000 yen, get up over 2,000 yen for a 720 bottle, you're starting to get to something that's really, really interesting. So if you're a spirits fan, if you like tequila, or mezcal, I should say, if you like really interesting rums, if you like stuff that has a little bit of personality to it, yeah, just lay out let it get up there over 2,000 yen. You're going to bring home a pretty interesting bottle. Now, the really, really expensive stuff right now is still under 4,000 yen. It's very, very affordable.
Oh, wow. Because if you think of expensive whiskeys, you go into like thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I think you'll probably agree with me that the average Japanese consumer is pretty price conscious.
Yeah.
So it's most shochu makers and awamori makers are very, very hesitant to price their products the way they probably should.
Because it's a shift from what they've been doing for so long.
And people will make their purchasing decisions based on 10 yen. I mean, it's really, that's, and who buys the shochu for grandma? So there's that.
You said you're a little bit more of a purist and you love the flavor of the shochu. Now, for international markets, you stressed how important it is to kind of go through the bartenders and serve it on a plate and serve it in a way that they can serve it to their customers, which goes through cocktails. Mm-hmm. What do you do with the shochu? And how do you then kind of bring it into a market where cocktails are already made with gin, with whiskey, with vodka, with tequila and whatnot? Where does it fit in there?
We were sort of lucky with the products that we decided to bring to the States. Without thinking too much about it, selected some brands that just ended up being a very natural fit for high end or high concept cocktail bars. Mm-hmm. So we got lucky there. I was able to go into bars, and I don't want to tell bartenders what to do. I don't want to. A lot of bartenders are like chefs. They want to feel like they're in control of the process. They're the creative person behind what's going to end up on the menu. But I would bring it in and bring the products in, taste them on it, and say, well, here's what I've seen other people do with it, and these are the notes that I get from it, and this is where I would love to see somebody do these sorts of things. And we have a couple of products that we have an awamori in particular that you can basically take and fit into any classic cocktail, whether it's an old fashioned, a Negroni, all the big names that we're used to hearing these days. You can use it in any of those contexts. And it sings. And so bartenders saw that very quickly, and they're like, ooh, this is a nice tool to have. And I can do something unique and different, and that's going to put my name on the map.
So you'd replace the gin in the Negroni with shochu or awamori
with this particular brand. Yes, you can. We have a roasted barley shochu that is used all across the country in espresso martinis. Oh. And it's nice because it brings the alcohol content down, which is really what a lot of people are looking for these days. It also brings the calorie count down, and it adds this chocolatey note, which people tend to love. So it's everywhere. I mean, it's done really, really well for us. We didn't plan it that way. I don't think I'd ever had an espresso martini until like 3 years ago, but it just worked out that it was the perfect complement to that. It's not really the base spirit. It's a modifier, what they call in the industry a modifier, but it works. And now any good cocktail bar in the States probably has a shochu cocktail on the list now.
Oh, interesting.
It's changed very quickly.
How is that now affecting the shochu market here in Japan? So in the early 2000s, third big boom, then came the bust in 2011, 14, that kind of period. And now 30 years later, 30 years behind sake, they are starting to export, which is kind of, how is this affecting these distilleries that you mentioned are mostly local, small, family-owned businesses with probably little to no connection to this overseas market as well, but may see an increase in demand? And
it's incredibly complicated, but especially the US and its weird relationship with alcohol in general. If you're dealing with wine, beer, sake, it's hard enough. But once you get into spirits, it's like they treat it like the devil. So there's all this extra regulation. There's so many more hoops you have to jump through. And for a mom and pop type of distillery, that's just insurmountable. Also, America has a really complicated distribution system, which is intended to protect the consumer. It does not do that at all. It's kind of dumb. It's extremely dumb. I hate it. But it's the way that it works. And for a small company with no extra people to throw time and energy at this, it's just inaccessible. So it's really been the larger distilleries that are starting to benefit from this uptick in, as a very small uptick, very modest uptick in sales and exports to other parts of the world. But I think we need both sides of that. We need the stories from all sides of the spectrum, every size distillery, to make people understand that this is a very serious part of the Japanese culinary economy. I mean, in 2022, there was more shochu produced in Japan than tequila in Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Now, about 68% of those agave spirits from Mexico were exported in 2022. Less than 0.1% of shochu production ever left Japan in 2022.
So it's still a pretty big domestic consumption then.
Yeah, it's more than sake.
But is that mostly then through chuhai and lemon sours, or is this consumed as like a spirit in cocktails or straight or on the rocks or?
So I am adding both the traditional stuff and the what I explained before, kourui shochu. But there's quite a bit more of the traditional stuff that's consumed in Japan than the kourui stuff. What I really wish it wasn't taxed as shochu. I wish it was a different thing. But the government calls it shochu, so we'll call it shochu. But when you take out the kourui and you compare traditional honkaku shochu and ryukyu awamori with sake, there's a little bit more sake that is shipped every year. But it's really, they're almost neck and neck right now. So, but I would say if we're going to take out the kourui shochu from shochu, I think we should take out futsushu from sake sales because futsushu has kourui shochu in it.
Oh,
yeah, it's they use brewer's alcohol to level out the aroma. So
when sales increase, so when there's an opportunity for an increase in sales, and especially a door opening to a foreign market, usually that's also when maybe larger corporations, beverage corporations, are interested in like maybe investing, acquiring these local family businesses. How is this kind of happening, or is this happening right now in the shochu industry as well? Do we see a shift from family-owned to family brand, corporate-owned companies?
We've seen a little bit of, I'm thinking of one example in particular where a liquor store chain invested in a small distillery in Kagoshima that was faltering and about to go bankrupt. And it really, they survived and are doing great things with that financial backing. It's starting to happen. And there's quite frankly, a lot of vulnerable family businesses out there. Not only family, but also the medium-sized distilleries that don't quite have the economies of scale like the big boys do. And so they're constantly having to make new products all the time to compete in all these diverse spaces against just seemingly unending competition. And I think you're going to see a lot more investment from third parties. I know also Diageo has sort of...
That's a French company, is it? No.
It's a global behemoth. But yeah, I think originally it may have been. It's a massive global drinks company, and they own a lot of very, very famous international spirits brands. And they have sort of started an incubator type of situation where they are able to have a semi-controlling interest in a distillery that they invest in, with the option of, if it goes well, then I think there's a future option for increased investment. I'm not entirely sure. It's a little bit hush-hush, but there isn't a lot of international money in that space right now. I think there's some restrictions on trying to protect the industry from too much internationalization, at least as far as the financing goes. I think the industry is going to need some more backing financially if we're going to get to the point where the fourth shochu boom transpires overseas. It could be 5 years from now. It could be 15 years from now. And that's a hell of a long time.
So 20 something years ago, you came to Japan and then you went down this rabbit hole of shochu. where has it brought you today? Where are you at today on your shochu journey? You have these companies in Japan and the US exporting the drink. You said that despite not being in this a teacher anymore, you still consider yourself an educator. So where are you on that now? What are you currently working on?
My overriding goal is to be able to order shochu in any bar I walk into anywhere in the world. That's my end game. We're quite a far ways from that, but it's been a very nice last couple of years just in terms of the recognition of what shochu is and what it can be around the world. And people all of a sudden finally are starting to figure out that Japanese shochu, S-H-O-C-H-U, is not the same as Korean soju, S-O-J-U. In fact, they're starting to take me at when I say this, people believe me. There's no easier way to insult two cultures at one time than to conflate soju and shochu. It's like, congratulations, you just pissed a whole bunch of people off. And people have been doing it for years, but now bartenders are starting to educate their customers. Like, no, this is not soju. It's not gonna give you a huge headache. We're not gonna shoot it. We're not gonna play any drinking games with this. We're gonna sip it slowly.
Has this been a challenge for you, kind of going overseas and introducing shochu and the Korean drink, right?
Oh my God, yes. It's for a long time it was impossible because California had this loophole on the book since the 90s whereby soju, if it said soju on the front label and it was bottled at 24% ABV or lower, you could sell it on a beer and wine license. Now, most people don't realize that when you go into many restaurants that don't have a bar, they actually can't create a bar. They can't sell tequila and gin because they don't have the right license. Those licenses are much more expensive. And sometimes they're restricted in terms of how many bar licenses can be given in a particular neighborhood, especially if there's schools and stuff like that. And so this was huge. Soju, which is a spirit, could be sold on a beer and wine license only in California. And some of the bigger shochu makers since the 90s were just like, oh, loophole. So they would dilute their product down a little bit to 24% ABV or under. They would fraudulently, that sounds hyperbolic. It's not. They mislabeled their product as soju and they sold it into sushi shops and stuff in California. So there are generations of American consumers who thought that shochu and soju were the same thing because it said soju on the damn label. This has been such a headache for me and for everybody for a long time. And it's a self-inflicted wound.
So if we set the record straight now, what is soju then in comparison or in opposition to Japanese shochu?
Soju, and I'm talking green bottle, those little green bottles that are everywhere. They're omnipresent worldwide now. And this, you can look this up. It's essentially an artificially sweetened vodka that's at very low proof. All right. They just make a spirit. They use a patent still or a continuous still like they use for vodka. It doesn't matter what it's made from because they strip all the taste out of it and they just make almost pure ethanol, like 95% ABV. They make that spirit, they water it down, they dose it with lots of artificial sweeteners and body enhancers. It gives it a little bit of a round feel to it, other acids to create their signature flavor profile. And these days they make these weird fruity ones that they don't drink so much in Korea. That's mostly for the gringos overseas who are all about it right now. And so that's what soju is. That's 99.9% of soju production is that green bottle stuff. It's designed to be cheap to produce and cheap to consume. And it's consumed at pace in bloated shot glasses communally. And it's a great palate cleanser with red Korean spice food. But forgive me, it's not a particularly sophisticated endeavor.
Whereas shochu, as you described, by law, cannot have any artificial flavorings added to it. And
the goal is the flavor of the fermentation brought through into the final product. And it's a lot harder to make. You can't just have machines make it for you.
But that's an entire generation that you kind of now have to re-educate or educate on. No, these are two different beverages.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That takes a lot of work.
And fortunately, the bartenders are helping us out quite a bit because they have no problem correcting customers who are like, no, actually, you've never had shochu before. If you say that you had shochu, but it was at a Korean barbecue place, that's not shochu. That was soju. And so that's been very helpful. But that's only within the last couple of years. We've really made some good progress there. So, oh, geez, what a headache that has been, though. It's really, you're not starting for years when I was going overseas and doing this, I wasn't starting from like a clean slate. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like we have no knowledge. No, we have incorrect knowledge. So I'm starting from negative territory when I'm trying to get people on the ground floor of this new category. It's getting easier, but only just.
As a teenager, you were brewing beer in your kitchen when your parents were away at church. Have you ever thought of kind of getting into shochu brewing yourself or distilling and making your own?
Every time I go back to Vermont, my brother-in-law, almost half the time he brings up, he's like, what if we started a shochu distillery in Vermont? And it's tempting just because I love my family and I miss them dearly. And so if ever there was a reason to go back to Vermont, that could be it. I don't know. And he's a huge shochu fan. Unfortunately, Vermont is a control state, which is a whole nother conversation. This is the complicated nature of American alcohol channels. Basically, there's one customer in Vermont. It's the damn government. They decide what spirits all Vermonters have access to. It's stupid. And so we haven't been able to get in front of the board that selects what goes into the catalog. So my home state can't sell it there.
Would there be a restriction on making shochu overseas and it then not being shochu because it's not made in Japan?
Japan, I mean, shochu is just a category. So it's the same as beer or wine. Anybody can legally make a beer or wine and call it as such, as long as it follows certain principles. What people can't do is make, for instance, a ryukyu awamori, which is protected by the WTO, just like champagne is. Champagne can only be made in Champagne, France, using traditional techniques or established techniques. If you make a sparkling white wine in Spain, it's not called champagne. They call it cava.
Oh, it seems like they have champagne in Russia now.
Oh, shoot. I didn't know that.
That a few years ago, I think, came up that they just allowed to call their sparkling wine champagne. So you have champagne in Russia, which is not made in Champagne, France.
That can't, what? I had not heard that. I'm sure the WTO has something to say about that.
I don't know if the Russian government currently is interested in listening to what they have to say, but...
I think that could be the case, yes.
That was a funny story to read because, yes, champagne is not the name of the beverage, it's the name of the region where the beverage is made. Yeah.
Scotland.
Or Prosecco in Italy.
Correct, yes. And so ryukyu awamori is awamori that's made using traditional techniques only in Okinawa. You can make a 100% black koji rice distillate anywhere in the world. You can't call it ryukyu awamori. So we could make a shochu. We wouldn't be, anybody outside of Japan is not burdened by the official list of ingredients. Like they could make a shochu from what, I don't know, that plant right over there. But it wouldn't be a honkaku shochu by Japanese standards. And so if you called it a honkaku shochu is not a protected label, you'd probably get some side eye from Japan. And people are like, what are you doing? And I do know a lot of shochu makers worldwide who are very, very scared to disrespect the culture. They're worried about cultural appropriation. And so they're very respectful. I've had almost arguments with makers around the world. I'm like, call it shochu, please. Because you're making a shochu, and they're like, we don't want it. We don't want any smoke from this. I'm like, no, do it. You're respecting the tradition. You're learning as much as you can from it. You're just trying to do something that you find to be very interesting. This is respectful. And so some cases I win that conversation, some cases I lose it. But there are shochu makers all around the world now who are making rice shochu, barley shochu, all sorts of different products that are sometimes alarmingly good.
The Japanese government made you an official ambassador for those native spirits and beverages. What does that exactly mean? How are they supporting the promotion and the development of this industry overseas?
The fact that I'm an ambassador for these spirits doesn't really, it's just a title. That's all it is. And it means that I'm probably the first person that government or quasi-governmental agencies turn to if they want to have somebody speaking at this thing overseas at Ven Expo in Bordeaux, France, or they want somebody at Bar Convent Brooklyn in either Berlin, Brooklyn, Singapore today. But it doesn't really mean a whole lot more than that. I don't have a budget that I can spend. It's just I'm a useful
Public speaker.
Yeah, they can kind of plug and play me, and it's just it's really nothing more than that. Now the government as a whole should be doing a lot more to support shochu's outward expansion. They're starting to get on board, but it's really just peanuts so far. And I think there's just so much risk in this entire endeavor. And I think they feel like they can hit home runs if they're promoting sake, because there's a network, there's a foundation for the success. Yeah. And there's so many different people they can turn to. There's agencies that have a lot of experience with putting on sake related events, competitions, seminars, everything you can imagine. There's pretty robust educational resources out there. People can become certified. WSET, right? They have a level up to level 3 sake certification, which is really well done.
Is there anything for shochu? Nothing. So there is no such thing as a shochu sommelier that could...
Not overseas. There is in Japan. There's the Shochu Kikisakeshi exam, but it's 100% in Japanese. So that's off limits to most people. And I did it. It almost ended my life. It took several years off my life. It was that's how I learned to read and write Japanese, was to pass that damn test. But I'm glad I did. But anyways, the government is starting to put some of their weight behind it. We need more money. The government, if I had my druthers, the government goes out there, pitches Shohei Ohtani, and he starts drinking shochu casually, and we get that on Instagram. That changes the entire conversation. But that's going to be millions of dollars, and it's hard to get millions of dollars out of the government, even though it's not that much compared to their total, their ad spend.
Yeah, Shohei Ohtani drinking shochu might not be the best image for sportsmen, but probably will get a lot of people into shochu for sure.
Hey, the Dodgers have an official shochu now. The LA Dodgers, Nikkaido Barley Shochu is like the official shochu of the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Interesting. You said there's no material out there for shochu. So in 2014, you wrote your own book or published your own book, the handbook, or Shochu handbook.
Yeah.
Any plans to make more, to provide more material for people to kind of get into this, maybe one step deeper into the rabbit hole?
Yeah, I'm working currently, we are working currently on an online set of resources and an online community that will combine community aspects of, just like if you happen to be in any group on Facebook or on Discord or whatever it happens to be, combine that with really serious educational materials so that we can create a really activated community of shochu and awamori lovers that's international. Additionally, I'm working with my dear friend Stephen Lyman and another good friend, Emma Jansen, and then, a fourth friend, Pablo, down in Kagoshima. We're working on a book proposal to do like the next level shochu book. My book, the Shochu handbook, really is a 101 for people who just want to get a decent but still very surface understanding of the category.
Similar to the sake handbook from John Gontner.
Yeah, I don't want to ever put myself on the same level as John, but it definitely inspired by that. I consider John to be an amazing mentor and just somebody who I've followed incessantly since I first came to Japan. And so it's always my goal to sort of be the John Gontner of the shochu world. But I'm very far from that point as we stand right now.
You came to Japan to follow your now wife because she wanted to live here. And you ended up kind of going down this rabbit hole of shochu. How has this kind of changed or impacted or developed or made your life? Sorry, these were like a lot of ways to phrase it, but made your life here.
I am very, very lucky because what ended up happening in Japan, just because I followed my gut or followed my heart, I found something that combines three things that I'm incredibly passionate about: education, small batch, handcrafted drinks, And then another thing that we haven't discussed yet, but also performance. I spent a lot of time on stage. I do have an IMDb profile. I love acting. And my role as this shochu nut is the perfect fulcrum of those three passions from my life. I wake up most days very, very excited to get to work, because even though I'm not good at any of these things that I'm doing right now, I learn a lot. I meet a lot of great people, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be part of, one of the many people who are trying to create the foundation that's going to provide for the future success of shochu and awamori internationally. Just like what sake has now, and why sake is booming and will continue to boom for years to come, is because of all of that hard work that was done by people like John Gautner and all the people that he taught, who are now out there as the troops. They have
It's
an
like
army.
Exponential.
It is
growth.
It really is. He inspired so many people, and those people inspired so many more people. It's remarkable what he has done over the last few decades, and I'm trying to recreate that with a different aspect of Japanese culinary culture.
So I guess we'll see a lot more from you on stage, off stage, in izakayas, overseas, and in Japan. Super excited to see all what's coming, and perhaps get a look at your next book whenever it comes out. Christopher, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Toby.
Sharing your story. Do you feel like there's anything we haven't really talked about? You mentioned your IMDb profile. Is this something you wanted to get into, or is it something for people to discover by themselves when they have some time? I think I've seen a couple of movies on there, which at first I was like, is this the same person that is going to come on the podcast? And yes, it is.
Yeah, I unfortunately I don't have any time to test for screen roles right now. Co-managing two companies in time zones 13 to 14 hours apart is not a recipe for flexibility. But I think if you're interested in learning more about these drinks, then maybe look at my book, The Shochu Handbook. Look at my friend Stephen Lyman's book, The Complete Guide to Japanese Drinks. And what you can really do, actually, wherever you are in the world, is go to your liquor store, your local liquor store, and if they don't have shochu, ask them to find it. They will, believe it or not, a liquor store will buy things that they know they can sell. And the faster they can sell them, the better the business is. So if you have a liquor store that you go to frequently, just say, hey, I would love to have a couple of sweet potato shochu, a barley shochu. Can you source some for me? And they'll bring in a case or two. As long as you promise to buy some of it, they might get into it. And that would be hugely helpful to the industry, to these beautiful family-run distilleries that I've become so fond of.
And for people who have even more questions, we'll make sure to link your website, your contact information down in the description if they want to reach out, if they want to collaborate or work, or maybe have you as a speaker at one of their events. Thank you for sharing so much of your knowledge on shochu. I learned a lot. It was super interesting.
Cheers.
And I hope a lot of our listeners did too. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again in the next episode. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.